Bonjour, bienvenue à cette conférence de presse au Théâtre national de la presse. Welcome to the National Press Theatre Press Conference. Minister, whenever you're ready, you can start.
Over to the National Chief to start.
Quay, greetings. I'm Joanna Bernard, Interim National Chief for the Assembly of First Nations and the Regional Chief for New Brunswick. I'm a member of the Madawaska Maliseet First Nation, and I would like to acknowledge the lands that we are gathered on is the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Nation. This week represents a long-awaited milestone in a years-long process that has depended on the advocacy and strength of First Nations, including our representative plaintiffs in this historical class action. We have worked hard with the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal over the past 16 years, and then at the negotiating table for 3 years to reach this point. The federal court's decision to approve this final settlement agreement is a welcome step forward in acknowledging the harms that too many First Nation children and families have experienced due to discrimination. It is with respect and gratitude that I acknowledge our respective plaintiffs, and I thank them for the strength they have shown on behalf of those affected by discriminatory practices in the First Nations Child and Family Services and Jordan's Principle. Each representative plaintiff shared a painful story, standing before the courts, the media, and the public with grace and courage. It is because of their commitment that this process that we are standing here today, closer than ever before to compensation reaching the affected children and families. I would like to thank Regional Chief Woodhouse for acting as the lead negotiator on behalf of the Assembly of First Nations. Also, I'd like to thank the legal team at the Assembly of First Nations for their exceptional legal advocacy at the Human Rights Tribunal in this class action. Also, I'd like to thank the Executive Committee and the First Nations in Assembly for providing us with support and guidance throughout this process. Thank you to Dr. Cindy Blackstock of the First Nations Child and Family Caring Society for being a champion of this work. And finally, I'd like to thank the Government of Canada colleagues for their willingness to listen, collaborate, and move this work forward together. The path forward for the Government of Canada to address the discrimination of First Nations Child and Family Service and Jordan's Principle is to ensure that it never happens again. We again call on the Prime Minister to apologize to the House of Commons, to our representative plaintiffs, while respecting First Nations protocol. Compensation is just one part of the broad effort to bring acknowledgement and healing to First Nations, and we cannot rest until significant changes are made to the First Nations Child and Family Services and system and Jordan's Principle. The Assembly of First Nation remains committed to this work, and we will never stop advocating on behalf of First Nations children and families. Waliwan Walalan, thank you, merci.
Might I suggest that the plaintiffs go next?
Buju Ashley Indigenous, Bemea Wigwasichiman Indigenous, Migazit Indodem, Mishkigogmang and Donji. Hello, my name is Ashley. I'm a member of Mishkigogmang First Nation, and I'm Eagle Clan. And I'm really grateful that we're here on Algonquin territory together today to celebrate the approval of the final settlement agreement. But I really want to start by taking a moment to remember all of the youth in and from care who we lost due to the discrimination that's at the core of this class action. I'm so grateful that we're finally at this point, but I'm also heartbroken that not everyone who's been impacted is here to celebrate with us. It's taken far too long, and we've suffered far too much to have waited for this. This process has been really difficult and traumatizing for myself and also for the other representative plaintiffs, and I know there's a lot of youth out there who are being impacted right now too. I'm really grateful for the supporters that we've had come out this week. There's a group of youth from Ganawagi who are here, also some fellow Anishinaabe Nation youth who have been in care as well, have been out here providing support for myself and also to the other rep plaintiffs and just being present, and I appreciate that, but I also hear them when they say that they're really triggered. I myself am triggered too by everything that's been happening, and I'm sending them strength right now. And sending all of us youth in care strength. I want to thank, I really want to thank all the elders and everyone who's been supporting us with their prayers and ceremony too. That's really helped us get to this point and helped us be strong until now. And I also want to thank Regional Chief Cindy Woodhouse for all of the support she's provided over the past 3 years. Like, it's been incredible. She's amazing. And I also want to thank Dr. Cindy Blackstock as well, our national chief, as well as our former national chiefs who were also involved in this, and former regional chiefs too. It's been a really long journey. And I'm really happy and really grateful. Even if my face isn't showing it right now, I'm just grateful and relieved that we're finally here. It's been difficult, and I hope that everyone who's watching this and everyone who's involved, all the members of government, all the young people who are out there watching and listening to this press conference and who've been watching the cases go on at the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal and the class action, I hope that they all realize and they all remember and take with them that it's not okay to discriminate against us. It's not okay for us to be underfunded just because of being First Nation, just because of being on reserve. And I hope that they take that to heart, and that especially the youth who are listening, as they grow up and grow on to their positions in the world, in our society, that they're able to take that with them and make sure that they themselves stand up and make changes if they see that similar discrimination's happening. And with that, I just want to say miigwech as well to all of our legal counsel who have worked really hard to get us here. There's a ton of lawyers involved, so I can't name everyone because I only have like 30 seconds left. But I'm really grateful for everyone from our legal counsel and from the Assembly First Nations as well, the staff, like Steph and Jess and so many other people at AFN who have been supporting us and making sure that we get to where we need to be, and who have been putting pressure politically and through their workplaces to make sure this happened. So thank you so much, everyone, and miigwech.
Kakyo tamskat na no temtik askigayat isigasoyan. Hello everyone. My name is Carolyn Buffalo. I am from Musquecheese. I am specifically from the Montana First Nation, which is in Treaty 6 territory in what is now known as Alberta. And I too want to acknowledge the territory that we're on, the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. And I also am grateful for another day of life and another day of opportunity to be of service. And I thank the Creator for everything. I thank the Creator for getting us all here. When I was chief in 2008, and I came to a December assembly, National Chiefs Assembly, and on my mind was the discrimination that we were facing, and that we were continually having doors slammed in our faces. People were saying no to us just for basic things that other people were getting. And I spoke at the assembly, and I reminded all of the chiefs that they have to speak on behalf of all of the handicapped children on reserve, because our children are the most marginalized. They're children, they're handicapped, and they're First Nations. And the discrimination they face is terrible, unconscionable, but it was very easy for Canada and the provinces to do it because they're invisible. But I wanted to make sure that my son Noah was not invisible. He has a voice and he has a role. And that is why we agreed to take on this role as representative plaintiffs. We never should have had to fight. We never should have had to be, there never should have, pardon me, we shouldn't need a Jordan's principle. Excuse me. When I was chief and I was in the gallery when the House of Commons passed the Child First principle. And when that happened, we all thought, okay, now the discrimination is going to stop, things are going to improve, but they didn't. And then in 2016, when the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruled in favor of our case, I thought, okay, now the discrimination is going to stop. But it didn't, and it continues on to this day. This is why we agreed to take on this fight on behalf of all of those who can't. I want to acknowledge Jordan River Anderson and his amazing, wonderful, courageous family. I want to acknowledge Marina Beadle, the late Marina Beadle, who had to go to the Human Rights Tribunal just so she could keep her handicapped son at home. We shouldn't have to do these fights. So I'm very, very grateful that we're here today, that we have reached this point. We now have the agreement approved by the court, and hopefully now the discrimination will stop. I too want to thank everyone, all of the national chiefs who've been involved, Regional Chief Woodhouse, our amazing legal team who worked so hard for us, and I also want to thank Canada for entering into this agreement. But it did take you guys long enough. Those are my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carolyn and Ashley and National Chief. And I first of all just want to also acknowledge the unceded and unsurrendered territory of Algonquin Anishinaabe people, where I have a privilege to work here week after week as a parliamentarian. And of course, I do want to thank the AFN, you, Joanna, and National Chief, and obviously the plaintiffs, Moushoom and Trout, and certainly Dr. Blackstock and the First Nations Child and Caring Society, who have persisted. I'm reminded of the saying during the Hillary Clinton campaign, nevertheless, she persisted. And it really was about persistence on behalf of the litigants, because there were many times, I'm sure, that people felt like giving up, reaching walls of unwilling and partners, a partner in particular, which would have been Canada. I also want to thank the Honourable Marie Sinclair, who came in last Christmas when we did reach the agreement in principle, and who helped, I think, all of us find a path forward to have these conversations with mutual respect and with honesty and with integrity. I would also be remiss not to thank Minister Miller, who was a big part of the work that we did on our side, and certainly is a champion, and wishes he could be here today. He said to send his regards. And I also would like to thank Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for the mandate to be able to do this work. It's hard to do the work as a minister if you don't have the fiscal mandate to be able to do it. And the Prime Minister's office worked very closely with my office and Minister Miller's and all of you, so that we could get to this historic day. And it is a historic day for First Nations children and families and for all of Canada. I'm really grateful to Ashley and Carolyn and others that shared their stories at the ceremony that we had that was put on by AFN on Monday. The stories are painful to hear. Too many Canadians don't know those stories. Many Canadians don't understand what kinds of historic harms have been caused. But it's hard to hear stories like Ashley's of children that have survived foster home after foster home, to be disconnected from their roots, their culture, their language, their family. Or stories like Carolyn Buffalo and her son, who have suffered tremendous indignities as they tried to keep their son close to home, close to love, close to family. And the many, many other stories that I've heard in my career previous to politics, and certainly as a minister over the last 8 years, of people dislocated and in immense pain as a result of that dislocation and that discrimination. So this is very real, this harm, and it is long-standing harm, and it is intergenerational harm, and it is hard to recover from. And so just because things are invisible doesn't mean that it's okay. And I think Carolyn is exactly right, that sometimes discrimination happens in the shadows where no one is looking and where it's much easier for decisions to be made in very cold and fiscal ways that don't reflect the suffering those decisions will result in. And so thank you for, yet again, telling a part of your story today. So historic harms do deserve historic compensation. It's my understanding this is the largest settlement in Canada's history. And though it is about financial compensation, I am fully aware, and I think the government is fully aware, that compensation, although essential as an acknowledgement of harm, is really just a token of an acknowledgement of that harm, that it cannot bring back childhoods, it cannot bring back people, and it can't undo the harm. But it's a huge piece in Canada acknowledging that that harm was inflicted, and it was often inflicted with full awareness of the pain that it would cause. I want to thank all of the partners who pushed us to do better, especially in the last 2 years as we've had these difficult conversations together. I've had individual conversations with partners. I've had, obviously through our offices, we've had conversations, but everybody agreed to stay at the table and work towards this agreement. And I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for that willingness. I hope that this kind of discrimination never happens again. And we are, as the litigants and as National Chief mentioned, we are working on a comprehensive $20 billion reform of child and family services so that we get to the place that First Nations children and youth and families know that they have equal worth in the eyes of the Government of Canada and hopefully in their provincial and territorial partners' eyes as well. There's a lot of work to do, but I am confident that with the partners we will get that work done. I believe that without doing that work, we are abandoning the hope of Canada, actually. Every child needs to have a fair chance to reach their full potential, and Canada needs every child to reach their full potential to meet the challenges ahead for us as a country and us as a world. Aujourd'hui, je pense à tous les enfants.
Today, I'm thinking of all the children and families that have suffered discrimination. And this historic settlement will not remove this harm, but it recognises and allows us to go down the path of reconciliation. So now it is time to reform our services so that this never happens again. And we will do that in partnership with our partners such as the First Nations Assembly and the Caring Society.
Everyone for coming today.
Thank you. We'll now start the question period. As a reminder, one question, one follow-up. Fraser from APTN.
Hi, thank you. The first question is for Minister Hajdu, and I guess my question would be, in the last couple of years since you've been in your current portfolio and been part of this sort of compensation process, what lessons have you learned? And saying this in the fact that the AFN and Canada signed an agreement in January of 2022, but it was not a complete agreement. It did not include not meet the terms of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, and Canada proceeded to along with the AFN, to be honest, fight and say it was a final agreement and it wasn't. And you had to waste a year and then go back and sign an agreement for a new agreement for another $3 billion. So what lessons have you learned that maybe where Canada and partners could avoid this again?
Well, I think that the first lesson I would say is persistence. These are difficult conversations, but without partners at the table, and I think there have probably been many years where Canada hasn't been at the table in any good faith, there wasn't an ability to go back and reshape when things weren't right. We took the hearing from the CHRT, the ruling from the CHRT very seriously, and we returned to the table with all the partners to address the gaps, and here we are today. And look, I think obviously we need to be ambitious when we are seeking mandates for these kinds of settlements. We were working within a mandate that we had, and when we heard it wasn't enough, we went back and we got a broader mandate. And by mandate, I mean more money. And it was important that to me that I had the support of the Prime Minister in that work, and clearly I did, because here we are.
But would you say that you made mistakes, because clearly Canada didn't want to open up the agreement again until it was pretty much forced to, when all the chiefs and leaders met at the AFN and said you had to meet the agreement?
Well, I think every step of the way, we've been open to hearing from partners how we can do better, especially once we renegotiated, re-entered in a true conversation. So, look, I think negotiations are difficult, and I think sometimes we arrive at agreements that are not satisfactory to all the parties, and that was clear, and it was communicated clearly, not just by the CHRT, but eventually, you're right, through the AFN and the leadership. And so we sought a broader mandate, and I had the support of the Prime Minister to get that, and here we are today with an agreement. So, look, I think we can all say we wish that this discrimination, first of all, should never have happened, and secondly, that we could have concluded this earlier. I'm just very grateful to be part of the work to conclude it now.
Thank you. Alicia?
Hi, Alessia here from the Canadian Press. Minister, you've said that reforming the child welfare system takes time and it's going to be a long process. But as we've seen with the 60 scoop settlement, the residential school settlement, and now this one here, the longer that Canada waits, the more that you end up paying in the long run. When we spoke the other day, you said that 10 settlements for the child welfare agreements on reserve have been signed so far, and that the $20 billion is being used to reform the system. How do you plan to do that in a way that acknowledges that there are a lot of Indigenous kids in the system right now still overrepresented?
Right. So you're right. There's two pieces of work going on right now. One is reforming the Child and Family Services program delivered through ISK, and that's the work that we're doing with AFN. And you're right, the faster we do that, the less suffering there is. And so certainly I impress that upon my colleagues regularly, and I'm very grateful that the partners are sitting with us to continue that hard work. And it is complex work, and we're lucky to have Dr. Blackstock there as an expert in this area to help us with how that might look, including tabling a very important document that could give us advice on the best way to do that. On the second piece of the enabling legislation of C-92 and the child welfare agreements, that's where the real transformation happens, because in my mind, that's where communities, First Nations, regain their rightful control over how children and families should be protected. And the coordinating agreements are not just honoring and respecting and upholding the law of First Nations as having paramountcy, which, by the way, we're at the Supreme Court defending. As you know, there are provinces that disagree with us right now. But it's also about ensuring an adequacy of funding so that there's a consistent amount of funding over a long period of time that people can count on and therefore can plan their services accordingly. I've been to several signing agreements, and there are some of the most joyous events I've been at as people recall their law and use it in a way that will result in children at home.
And the last time we spoke, again, you mentioned that you were in negotiations with the lawyers about the $80 million bill. How are those negotiations going? And do you think that the courts will side with the federal government stance and the AFN stance on that?
If I may,
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
to
yeah.
that, because I was just in court on that very issue, and I'll take the pressure off of the minister. I think it's safe to say the arguments have been made, the decision is under reserve, and we'll find out.
That's perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And just as a quick follow-up, is that decision being made tomorrow or at the end of the day today?
Well, to be honest, I had to leave the last 15 minutes, so for all I know, the decision was rendered, but I haven't heard anything to suggest that it had, and in normal course, this would be taken under reserve, and a decision will be released, and the judge will release that, and that will be public.
Thank you. Olivia, CBC.
Thank you so much. My question is about long-term reform. I'm wondering if you have a timeline for when this work will be completed, and if you could clarify, if there is another election, there's a new government, could that new government, by any chance, stall these payments that are supposed to go out for compensation and the money that's been set aside for long-term reform?
On the compensation payments, no. That money will be transferred very shortly to the managing firm that will manage those monies, and then AFN and the partners they will be deciding how best to design the compensation approach. And so that is solid. And on the long-term reform, I would assume that the money that we've booked and put aside will also be there. But yes, I mean, listen, any government can stall a process. This is the reality. I mean, look, let's go back a bit to, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People for a decade. And not to get all partisan here because it feels inappropriate at this moment, but the Conservative Party has never stood up for the rights of Indigenous people. They've never, ever agreed to the UN Declaration. They've never, ever stood up for equity. They've never attempted reconciliation. We're doing hard things together with partners. It's not easy. It's not straightforward. And sometimes it feels excruciatingly slow. But I can tell you that reconciliation is a key focus of this government, and I can't speak for other parties. I would hope that they will continue the momentum.
And just on the timeline, can you just clarify that before I get to my follow-up?
The timeline is, we will be negotiating, continuing to negotiate, and I think everybody wants this to happen quickly. So I know that the Prime Minister's office supports this work as well, and we'll be working closely with him to make sure that we have a robust mandate to continue that work.
And just as a follow-up, Minister, can we hear from you directly about why you oppose the $80 million in legal fees and what you think would be an acceptable amount of legal fees to be paid to lawyers?
I think the lawyer has really adequately covered that. We're in court right now to agree on an amount that seems reasonable. This has been an astronomical legal effort, and we acknowledge that and respect that, while also having a responsibility to keep fees in a reasonable space.
Thank you. People on Zoom, it's now time to use the raise hand function if you have a question. I see no question online. We have time for maybe a couple more questions in the room. Anyone? I'll go with Olivia, and I'll come back with you first.
I'd just like to know, has a request been made to the Prime Minister yet to apologize? And can we hear from the plaintiffs and Interim National Chief about why that's important, when you would like to see this apology?
I'm going to let the plaintiff speak on that, but yes, myself and Regional Chief Cindy Woodhouse have sent the letter already asking for the apology from the Prime Minister and the House of Commons to do the apology there. So maybe.
I have been asking for an apology for quite some time. It's really important to me because until that happens, this fight is not going to be finished for me and for Noah. It's really important to me that the Prime Minister gives my son Noah tobacco in accordance with our protocols and says to him directly, I apologize for all of the harms caused by Canada, and that it never should have happened. It's really important to me that the Prime Minister acknowledge in the House of Commons, before Parliament, before all of Canada, and so that it's on permanent Hansard record that he makes an apology to not just to Noah, not just to us representative plaintiffs, but to all of the children and families who have been harmed.
Thank you. Last question, Fraser.
Interim National Chief Bernard. I guess that really the compensation package that was approved this week is just kind of a first step, right? There's so many more things to go, and there's also the restructuring the whole on-reserve child welfare system. So what do you see is the AFN's role now moving forward that this first part has happened?
Thank you for the question. I think that the role of the AFN is to ensure that progress happens in a timely fashion. So I think that that's essential to ensure that things get done in it, and changes made as soon as possible to protect all the children and families.
Thank you. One last one from Alisa.
Hi, Alessia again. I would love to hear from the representative plaintiffs about what you would like to see going forward, just because I feel like when I'm speaking to community members, they're on a different page than where the federal government is on things. What would you like to see to stop discrimination in the child welfare system and in the healthcare system?
There's so much. Oh man, I mean, for starters, I think to go back to the apology question, I think that's one of the first starting points, because to me, and I believe as well in like Anishinaabe law, an apology it's not just like some tokenistic words. It's an actual, like, you apologize and you mean it and you change your behavior and you restore that relationship that should have been there. And I think that's really the first starting point for addressing the systemic discrimination, the underfunding, and all the harms and trauma that kids in the system are going through and have been through and are still experiencing now. After that, I mean, there's so many things that I could list off a whole bunch of things to you, but I think what's more meaningful is to point towards the communities and the nations themselves, the people who have children and who care for children, the moms and dads, and the parents that are there, and grandparents and aunties and uncles, as well as the youth themselves that are in the system, and what they believe that they need and what they need to experience and what they need for a healthy and to be with their families and be in their communities and be able to live where they should be living and where they can practice their culture and learn their languages and be on their lands and practice their rights as a First Nation person. I think that's what I want to see going forward. I think it's really important that as the long-term reforms developing, and as people start and as communities start taking back their right to raise their own children, that youth voice is heard as well.
It's hard to know where to start with that, but for me, a huge part of the whole of the systemic discrimination is the role of the provinces. That's not something that could be that we could address through this court action because it was with Canada. But going forward, the provinces are going to have to acknowledge their part in the discrimination. They're going to have to reform their systems. They need to get educated. They need to improve their systems and do better. There's still so much racism. All of these systems are predicated on racism and the assumptions that we can't look after our kids properly, when the reality is there's just been so much chronic underfunding in every area, with the lack of clean drinking water, lack of housing, the lack of land, the lack of adequate supports, the underfunding of our schools, the lack of access to proper medical care. The list goes on. Our terrible roads, lack of infrastructure. There's so much work that needs to be done in order for us to really be able to just to live, like just to have normal lives. And we're not asking for any more than that. We just want to be able to live safe, normal lives. And the provinces have really contributed to this whole mess. They need to step up and do their part.
And I know that that was my last question, but the minister, if you want to respond to them.
Well, I don't have much else to say. I will say that Carolyn is right, that the foundations of healthy families and children are the social determinants of health, which she's just described in detail. That is the work ahead of us, and we must work together as provinces, territories, First Nations leadership, municipalities, and Canada. And we have to stop arguing about whose responsibility it is and realize that we are each other's people, and that when we pull together and we commit to ensuring that every child has a fair chance to succeed, regardless of where that child is born or the language they speak or the color of their skin or their own personal background, when we pull together and make sure that children have every chance to succeed, that's when we're going to have the kinds of strength we need to see this country and our nations prosper. Thank you.
Before this is over, I wonder if I could just say a couple words about compensation for the class members. There are about 300,000 people in the class, young adults, their parents, their caregivers. They'll be interested in knowing when compensation is going to flow, and we anticipate a lot of questions about that. The earliest that the compensation will flow will be in and around mid to late 2024, and I wish it could be earlier. You would not believe the amount of work involved in trying to distribute this amount of money to this number of people and do it in a way that is that makes sense. So that's point number one, and it won't be for the entire class. It will be for a subset of the class, but that is the earliest time at which compensation will flow. And the second point is that anyone who wants information about the distribution, about the status of the payments, should go to fnchildclaims.ca, all one word, fnchildclaims.ca, and that's where you'll get the updated information, and that's where the claims forms will be. Notices will be provided to the greatest extent possible through social media, through emails, through every channel possible to let people know about this. There are going to be people out there beating the bushes to try to find class members, to make sure that they're there, that there are people to help them, that this is a very, very accessible, user-friendly approach. No one's going to be subjected to questioning and interrogations and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of work being done by the AFN, by the administrator, by a lot of people friendly to the class who want to make sure that this money gets into their hands and is safe and that they're safe. And so we just ask for a bit of patience because we know that this money is desperately needed by the class. And so further information is available on that website. And thank you for pointing that out to your readers and your viewers.
Thank you. This is all the time we have. Go ahead, yeah.
Just, yes, one closing remark I want to make in regards to there are a lot of lawyers out there trying to gather up the people to sign up with their firms, and that's not necessary. There is a process that they could do. It will not cost them anything. So I just wanted to get that out to the citizens, the 300,000 plaintiffs in the action.